Now, I'm no expert on Wall Street, but I do know a thing or two about buying and selling Sacramento Kings stock. But it's not the stock that you're thinking about. On today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, I'm going to be joined by former host of this podcast, current Sacramento Kings radio broadcaster, longtime Sacramento sports broadcaster, Jason Ross will be back here on Locked On Kings with me today. He and I are going to be looking at a few different Sacramento Kings stocks, and we're going to share whether or not we are buying or selling that stock. It's all in today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January all the way through to December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member, Sacramento Kings media member for the last 7 years. This will be my 8th season covering the Kings, formerly with radio, now with television at ABC 10 here in Sacramento. And before we get to my conversation with Jason Ross and go through these Sacramento Kings stocks, whether or not we're buying or selling, which by the way, we want you to be involved. So be ready to get involved in today's podcast. Did you watch or at least listen to the speeches from Chris Webber and former Sacramento Kings head coach Rick Adelman as they both were inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame last weekend? It was just an awesome weekend, and the pictures coming out of that weekend of many of that classic Sacramento Kings team from the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, Coach Rick Adelman is an absolute hero of mine, my favorite NBA coach of all time. So I was almost more excited to hear from him than I was to hear from Chris Webber, who's, of course, in my opinion, the greatest Sacramento King of all time, an absolute legend here in Sacramento. Both of them so rightly deserve being inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Hearing both of them speak, I'm not going to lie, I got a little bit emotional seeing Vlade up there introducing Rick, to see Doug Christie and Bobby Jackson there, Peja Stojakovic there supporting their former teammate and their former coach. I believe Mike Bibby was involved in some capacity. Jason Williams might have been there as well. It was really cool. And I mean, that was my team, right? And that was a lot of our teams. That was the team that I grew up watching and I grew up supporting. It was because of that team that I fell in love, not just with the game of basketball, but with a sports atmosphere, because how loud Arco Arena was. Arco Thunder, right? It was born maybe honestly before that. I can't speak to that. I was not alive when the Kings first came to Sacramento, and even though they were a bad team, I know that the original Arco Arena got plenty loud, but true Arco Thunder was born during those late 90s and early 2000s as we would sell out every single night, and people would drive from a long ways to come watch the greatest show on court play. So if you haven't watched those speeches or listened to those speeches, I encourage you to go and experience that. And if maybe you are listening to this and you are younger and you didn't experience that era of Kings basketball, make sure you research up on it. Watch some of those games. Watch that team play. Get familiar with not just Chris Webber, who I'm sure you're familiar with, but head coach Rick Adelman, because he is an absolute legend in my mind here in Sacramento, and he gets a lot of the credit that he deserves here in Sacramento, but never really received enough credit outside of Sac. Now with him going into the Basketball Hall of Fame, finally he is getting that credit that he deserves. Now it's time for my conversation with Jason Ross. We got some Sacramento Kings stock to decide whether or not we are buying or selling, including De'Aaron Fox being an all-star, the likelihood of a starting lineup featuring Fox, Halliburton, and Davion Mitchell working, Kings adding a star at or before the trade deadline. We're going to talk about it all next. Before that, though, I want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by our friends over at Sweatblock, the antiperspirant wipes that work better than anything else on the market. They're doctor-created, doctor-recommended. They work for up to 7 days per use, so a box lasts a long time. And it comes with a dry shirt guarantee, meaning if Sweatblock doesn't keep you dry, you'll get your money back. It's been featured and tested on the Rachel Ray Show, used by firefighters. It can handle their hot climate. It can certainly handle yours and mine. It's also a bestseller on Amazon for the past 10 years, over 13,000 reviews, and it's currently #1 in Amazon antiperspirant category. Manufactured in the NBA and super easy to get, not just available for you on Amazon. You can get it at your local CVS pharmacy if you don't prefer to shop online. Or honestly, the best way to get them is to go to sweatblock.com. And if you use promo code Locked On at checkout, you'll save 20%. So take advantage of that offer and make sure you're not dealing with those annoying and sometimes embarrassing sweat stains. And let me know if this sounds familiar. You've got one device that lets you catch the game live. You have another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You have our sports highlights on your phone. And you've got your neighbors, best friends log in for all the other good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV all together in one place. It's called Directv Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. It takes the worst part of TV and gets rid of it. So now it's all good. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with Directv Stream. You can learn more at directv.com. That's directv.com. Compatible device is required. Content varies by package. Hey, welcome to the Sacramento Kings stock market. You got two Kings financial experts here for you. Matt George, joined by the former host of the Locked On Kings podcast, the guy I booted out and I stole his job, Jason Ross, back with me here. Hey, Jay Ross.
What's up, Matt? How about if we have two Matt Georges? Is that possible?
Somehow I'm skinnier than that. I'm skinnier than that cardboard cutout. They made it extra skinny. If you're not watching on YouTube, if you're an audio listener, I apologize. He has the cardboard cutout that was in the Golden One Center that you guys just put me in a corner, right? You didn't have me sit next to anybody important?
No, you were all by yourself in the upper deck behind the curtains.
This is where Matt George belongs, behind the curtains where he can't ruin us with a sports take. Hey, I like that. I need that cardboard cutout. I guess I got to stop by the studio and grab it from you if I'm allowed back.
It'll cost.
It'll cost me. Well, trust me.
It's on eBay and the bids are going to the moon.
Yeah, a cardboard cutout of Matt George is about as useless and as priceless as they get. But we have some Sacramento Kings stock to share whether we're buying or selling. I have a bunch of different statements here about the Sacramento Kings for this upcoming season that we're going to discuss and weigh upon. And of course, the Locked On Kings listeners have been challenged to weigh upon it as well. And I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of buying out of this list with the optimism for next season. But we'll start with one that I know a lot of people, not just in Sacramento, but around the league are buying, and that's De'Aaron Fox as a Western Conference All-Star this season. Are you buying or selling that?
I'm buying. De'Aaron was played like one last year. If the team had won more games last year, I think he would have been one. His stats warrant it. The team hasn't won enough, but he might need some help. He might need some other things to happen. One, for example, is a guy who's a regular All-Star is Kawhi Leonard. He's obviously hurt. So there's one key player that generally gets in there. Now that's more of the front court position, but that's kind of what you need. You need some breaks, but certainly the most important thing, Matt, that he needs is wins from the team. If that happens, his stats will be good. He's the best player on this team. If I'm picking between the two, I'm buying.
Yeah, I think I'm buying too for that almost exact same reason. You brought up the wins. I think that's the big thing. I think De'Aaron Fox would have been more than a Western Conference All-Star last season had the wins followed suit. And in a way, they kind of did when he was playing his best basketball. Those were the two best stretches that the Kings win on last season. So I'm buying De'Aaron Fox as an All-Star because I'm expecting the Sacramento Kings win total to come up, and for him, of course, to be the largest part of that. But what about buying or selling De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Halliburton, and Davion Mitchell playing together as a starting lineup, not just a in-game lineup, but an actual starting lineup?
I'm going to sell that. I don't think that's going to be the plan for the team. I think there's some disadvantages to it. I think we'll see the advantages, though, utilized as a closing lineup. We've seen the Kings play three guards to close. The closing lineup last year had Buddy Halliburton and Fox. The year before it was Fox, Buddy, and Bogey. So I could see those three with Mitchell and Fox and Halliburton playing a lot at the end to try to close out games. Maybe Harrison at the 4 and and Holmes at the 5. So, but to start a game, I don't see it. I'm going to sell that.
I think I'm selling it mainly because I haven't seen it yet, but I'm buying the possibility of it just based off of what we've seen from Davion Mitchell. And I think if Davion is not only the extremely capable on-ball defender that he is, but if he's capable of stretching the floor, I think he opens up the possibility for it, but I have no idea really what that looks like, and I have a massive question mark of Tyrese Halliburton playing the 3 as a starter on a night-to-night basis. But I agree with you completely in terms of closing lineups and even like middle of the game stretches where the Kings need a little bit more defense. I expect us to get looks at the 3 of them playing together. And Jason, I wonder how early we'll get those glimpses, whether or not Davion will get that opportunity to play with those 2 guys right from the get-go this season.
Yeah, the one thing I thought about Davion this summer was he looked good. He looked really good, but I wanted to see him with the better players, with Fox, with Halliburton, with Buddy, with Barnes, that whole group. So I'm anxious to see him with that group, but you also will be missing out. I mean, your best shooter is still Buddy, assuming he's on the team. So that's a tough one to replace. Are you losing more with Buddy's shooting going out, but what you're gaining with Davion's defense? So that's something the coaching staff will have to figure out, but all those guys are going to play.
There's still a chance that he is moved before the start of next season. But as of right now, Marvin Bagley is part of the Sacramento Kings roster. And I think it's pretty safe to say that he, at the moment, is not considered part of the Kings core. He has been taken out and replaced by Tyrese Halliburton, maybe even Richaun Holmes, now that he's gotten the contract that he got. Maybe even Davion Mitchell is in that conversation as Kings core. But we all still expect that Marvin, if he stays healthy, can put up good numbers. So are you buying or selling, Jason Ross, the stock of Marvin Bagley playing his way back into the Kings core this season?
I'm going to sell based on track record. Kind of what you said earlier, you hadn't seen that lineup together. I hadn't seen Marvin do it. I think he has all the ability. And as long as he's on the team, I don't think they're done with him per se. I'm sure they've been looking at other options, but I hate to say it, I don't ever want to see the guy get hurt again, but that's what's happened. And so can we get 30 games in a row, 40 games in a row, 50 games in a row? It hasn't happened. So again, tough choice here on the 2. I think he's got the ability to do it, but if I'm picking, I'm selling.
I imagine almost every financial expert will tell you to make financial decisions based off of your brain and not your heart, because my heart wants to see Marvin Bagley become that player that the Kings hoped he would be when they selected him number 2 overall. But my brain says basically exactly what you were saying, that Marvin's not reliable. And how can a unreliable player be a part of your core? And honestly, even if Bagley played 82 games this season, I would be thrilled, but I still would question whether or not that was the anomaly compared to what we've seen so far out of Marvin. So I am selling him working his way back into the core, although I'm rooting for it to happen because I still think the Kings could use him for one. Yeah. And his best opportunity to do that, in my opinion, is still here in Sac.
Yeah. And the other part of that too, that's interesting is even when he was playing 10, 15, 20 games in a row, remember, he wasn't finishing games. Mm-hmm. So assuming the best, thinking with our hearts and getting him out there, you still may be in that same role where they're finishing with other guys and not playing Marvin on the end of the game.
This next one is a 2-parter. Buying or selling at any point this season, the Kings going on a 9-game win streak and a 9-game losing streak. Remember, they went on 2 separate 9-game losing streaks last season. So not one over the other, just looking at kind of a 2-parter. Are you buying or selling the Kings going on a 9-game losing or win streak this year and a 9-game losing streak this year?
Selling. Yeah, those are pretty rare. It was a weird year. It happened to them. There were pockets where they were great. There were pockets where they were awful. Most teams, win 2 or 3 and then a lot. It's just, and vice versa. If I'm picking, I'm selling that. I think those felt like outliers last year. So I'm selling the excessive streaks either way.
I'm immediately going against what I said in my last answer, and I'm making an emotional, not a smart financial decision. I'm going to buy a 9-game win streak just because, damn it, the Sacramento Kings deserve it. I'm going to buy it. At some point this season, the Kings are going to rattle off 9 in a row. Now, I'm hoping it's not 9 in a row at the end of the season when they're desperately playing catch up to try and sneak their way into the play-in, and they have to win out in order to do it. I'm expecting a 9-game win, or I'm buying a 9-game winning streak happening this season. I'm hard selling a 9-game losing streak. If they haven't learned that lesson after experiencing it twice in one season, they're never going to learn it.
Yeah, I don't even think the 0-2 Kings won 9 in a row.
Oh, yikes. Well,
I don't think so, but fact checkers, they'll back us up on that one.
There's a first time for anything. Will, we know for sure the 0-2 Kings didn't lose 9 in a row. So, hey, you got to start somewhere. Well, how about this? Buying or selling the Sacramento Kings, making the play-in, but as a 7th or 8th seed. So not just sneaking in via 9th or 10th, but a 7th or 8th seed and hopefully hosting a home game. Well, they would, guaranteed, even if they lost the first round, they would host a play-in game at the Golden One Center.
I'll buy it. I'm going to buy it. I'm obviously much more optimistic. I always think for the best. 15 years of losing is taken its toll on everybody. But Phoenix also showed us a roadmap. It is possible. Now, the Kings didn't overhaul their lineup as drastically as Phoenix did, but some of that was also contingent on player development. Ayton got better. Booker obviously got better. The pieces they added fit. And then Chris Paul was the one moving piece that they needed. I'd never seen this before, Matt, on a year where the Kings obviously didn't make the playoffs, that I liked as many pieces that I actually did. I was thinking, man, I got to keep Holmes. I'd be okay with keeping Buddy and even Marvin. I like Halliburton. I like Fox. Certainly Mitchell looks nice. Hey, if they kept Harkless and Terrence Davis, that was a team that didn't win. That had 2 9-game losing streaks, but I still wanted them to keep a lot of their pieces. So I'm going to look at it positively. So if I'm picking, I'm buying that one for sure.
I see the Kings and Memphis Grizzlies, and Memphis was the 8th seed last year. I see them on a pretty level playing field. And if I'm looking at both rosters, in fact, the most recent episode of Locked On Kings that I did, I had Sean Coleman from the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, and we debated De'Aaron Fox versus Ja Morant. Of course, Memphis is going to take Ja, Sacramento is going to take De'Aaron, and that's just an indication of how happy both teams are with their guy. But comparing rosters, I think Sacramento's the sexier roster in terms of talent. Now, Memphis has shown that they can play and win together, which is maybe more important than having sexy names and a compilation of talent. But I think the Kings and the Memphis Grizzlies will be on level playing field, which means I expect the Kings to potentially be in that 7th or 8th seed conversation. So I'm going to buy the Kings making the play in and doing it via the 7th or 8th seed. I don't know about 7th, but hey, I'll take 8th. Well, we'll take them getting in in any way possible at this point, which I think I asked Luke Walton about towards the end of the season or after the season was over, when he shared that the goal for this team was playoffs or bust. I asked him, does it matter how you get in? And he kind of rolled his eyes at me and said, it doesn't matter. Does it matter to you, J. Ross?
No, not at all. It'd be getting in, having an opportunity to get those guys to go through those valuable experiences like that. And I think the one area they could do it the most drastically, interchange it, was defense. I mean, you look at the outliers, 9-game losing streaks, that killed them. Dead last for a lot of the year in defense. I mean, again, I'm not asking them to be a top 5 defense, but if they were 20th, 18th, that's not great, but that's going to make them a better team.
Well, that's a perfect segue into our next bit of King stock here. Buying or selling the Kings as a top 20 defense in the NBA. So moving up, they ended up 29th, I believe, right? So moving up 9 spots minimum, 10 teams worse than them, 10 teams worse than them in the NBA defensively. That's a pretty significant improvement, even if you're still in the bottom half of the league.
Yeah, and again, that gives you the odds, and the numbers are pretty good right there to get to the top 2/3, and that it could be 20 and you get it. So I'll buy it. And maybe again, back to the optimism and the hope and the wish, but I think it's been such a point of emphasis. I do think Mitchell will be better. I think the continuity of having a lot of the same pieces back, and then they're just tougher and more physical. And the last part of defense is rebounding. And I think between Len and Thompson and keeping Holmes, if Bagley's healthy, he's a good rebounder. I think they got pretty good, tenacious defenders on the perimeter. Not a bunch of shot blocking, but more of a physical presence in the paint, and I think they'll rebound well. So not much higher than 20, maybe right around that range, but that would be enough, so I'll buy.
Yeah, I'm going to sell it just because I think 20 would almost be their max this year. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know how much I buy Davion Mitchell coming in and being that significant of a drastic improvement. I know we've talked about and had fun talking about, well, his defense would be infectious, right? And the team would want to match his intensity. But we're talking about a rookie here amongst a team of veterans who's not even considered one of the top players. Maybe he will be, but at this point in time, I don't think it's fair to consider Davion Mitchell a top player on this Kings team, nor is it fair to expect a rookie to come in and just change the culture all by himself, even if he didn't win a national championship at Baylor. So I'm going to sell it. But I do think 21, 22, 23, moving up 6 to 7 to 8 spots can be done. And I believe that just that movement alone could have a significant effect on the win column with the state of the NBA and how important offense is.
Yeah. And even if we're talking about like 3 or 4 wins, that's enough. I mean, that's not a humongous difference, but that would have been enough. So that would help.
We have the next 2 here are going to be focused around the trade deadline. And the first one is, we know Monte McNair has aggressively been looking for that disgruntled star, that star to add to this Kings roster. A lot of talk around Ben Simmons. It's quieted down a little bit. Might still happen. We don't know. But assuming it doesn't happen, assuming this is the roster that the Kings go into next season with, are you buying or selling the Kings adding a star, not necessarily an all-star, but a star level talent at or before the trade deadline during the regular season?
I would sell it. I don't think so. I think one, you have to have a willing party on the other side. I think right now it's been pretty hot, or at least the rumors out there with a guy like Simmons that would fit under this criteria. But if things worked out and they kept going and somehow he's playing in Philly, I feel like they would have figured things out. And I don't know what other name is out there, but that would be someone that maybe isn't even on our radar. But if I'm picking between all the choices, I think I'll sell that. I just don't see the Kings pulling that off.
I'm going to buy it, and maybe for the wrong reason. I'm going to buy it, and it could be a bad gamble for the Sacramento Kings. But I imagine the Kings at the trade deadline or around the trade deadline are going to be hovering around the play-in. And I imagine, let's say hypothetically, like things get worse between the Toronto Raptors and Pascal Siakam, and suddenly Siakam is more available than we thought. I wouldn't be surprised if Monte McNair tries to use Buddy Hield, Marvin Bagley, or maybe even Harrison Barnes, not all 3 of them together, but some combination of those guys, and throw a few first-round future draft picks as well into the mix to try for that swing for the fences move in season. I wouldn't honestly be surprised if McNair and the Kings try for that. For one, the desire to end the ridiculously long playoff drought, and 2, it's kind of Monty backing up what he said. So I'm going to buy it, but maybe for the wrong reason, Jason Ross.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I don't think it's going to be for lack of asking or being aggressive. I just needing 2 to tango here. And I don't know that the Kings have all the assets that other people are looking for.
Well, staying around the trade deadline, are you buying or selling Buddy Hield being a higher value trade piece, or maybe more desirable trade piece than Harrison Barnes at the trade deadline?
Wow. That one's really tough because I think people covet shooting. They always have, always will. That's where the league is going. Buddy is a gifted shooter. He's a sniper. Both contracts are going down. People also love professionals, good locker room guys. You're not going to find a better one than Harrison Barnes. I guess I'm going to go with Buddy. I'm buying that because of, one, probably the will and willingness to trade him. I think people would want shooting. Contract going down. It's not the full 4 years that's left anymore. Yeah, I'll buy that one, but that's close.
I agree. It is close. I'm buying Buddy Hield simply because of the contract. Because I think if you had swapped the contracts of Buddy Hield and Harrison Barnes last season around the trade deadline, you would have gotten a completely different approach to both players. Because I remember when the Kings gave Harrison Barnes the contract that he's on, I remember teams and fans around the league and even experts saying, wow, what a massive overpay. I would not give Harrison Barnes that much money. And it's crazy. Even if it's just $2 million, the difference in optics of 3 more years with the next year being $22 million and 2 more years, with the next year being $20 million. I think that's a
Right.
significant difference. So even if Buddy Hield doesn't really improve, let's say he just stays the same and Harrison Barnes stays the same as well, I still think both of them will have significant value. It might be pretty close, like you said, but I think Buddy Hield with his elite shooting, plus the fact that his contract is only 2 more years at 20 and 18 million, I suddenly think just that difference of 1 year and $2 million makes a massive difference in Buddy's trade value. So I'm going to I'm going to buy Buddy on that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting thing to watch between really those guys and throw in Marvin as well.
All right, the last one that I have for you, Jason Ross, is our Sacramento Kings stock and financial expert. The Kings buying or selling, the Sacramento Kings being a 500 or better team. And we saw not too many seasons ago the Kings hovering right around that. And I look at this roster, and depending upon if they play the right way and play a little bit of defense, I see the capability of them outperforming what their roster was a couple seasons ago.
Yeah, if I'm buying them getting into that 7, 8, 9, 10 play, like it's going to take more than 41. It could be 43, 42. It's not like this avalanche of wins. I don't think it's going to be the year what it was back in 2012, maybe where 50 wins wasn't enough. I don't think it's going to be that, but I'll buy it. I'll buy it that player development, improvement overall, kind of continuity, improvement on defense. If all those things, again, that a lot of ifs, but I think they got it in them. I'm going buy there.
Yeah, the Golden State Warriors, they were 6 games over 500, as were the Memphis Grizzlies were 4 games over 500, and they were both in the play-in. And then somehow the San Antonio Spurs, who also made the play-in, were 6 games under 500. So it just goes to show that drop off in the Western Conference. But the Kings, 10 games under 500. I think they're more than capable. And again, like I said there in the intro, if the Kings and that lineup of a couple of years ago, playing under Dave Yeager, playing that fast-paced style, if that team can be an around 500 team, then I think this team with a improved De'Aaron Fox and improved Tyrese Halliburton, please God, improved defense, I think they're capable of doing it. But the Western Conference is the Western Conference, the NBA is the NBA, so it also takes some luck and good fortune, as you know.
Yeah, and there's always a team that we anticipate to be better that has injuries or issues, or they make a trade. So it's never as predictable as it seems. I think the top usually is, but there's a couple teams, which I would say the Kings would be one of those that would be in the bottom part, but could still work their way into that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of range. And that's a big swing.
So there you go. That's the hottest stock in the Sacramento Kings stock market. Listeners, make sure you're sharing with us if you're buying or selling. As I know, Jason Ross is going to be trying to sell that cardboard cutout of Matt George, and will unfortunately probably not make his money back. He might have to pay someone to get rid of that for him, including shipping, J. Ross. So sorry about that.
I like it. It hangs out with me in the office, and we talk sometimes. You don't talk a lot on this one, but we talk. We have talks.
That's how you know it's not me, because it doesn't talk a lot. The Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by RockAuto.com. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to carry all the parts that you need. You'll end up just wasting your time having them order only the parts that their warehouse happens to carry at their set price point. And not to mention those prices, they're inflated. You can save yourself a boatload of money by shopping and getting your auto parts on rockauto.com. Why would you choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? You don't have to. Save that money instantly at rockauto.com. They have everything you need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today and find the solution for all of your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in there "How did you hear about us" box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. It's always a pleasure to have Jason Ross back here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Absolute treat to be able to speak with him. I know many of you OG listeners who have been with us since the beginning here on Locked On Kings miss him, so I try and have him on as much as possible. Heck, I just miss talking to the guy. I used to work with him and see him every single day. Now that I'm over at ABC 10, I don't have that privilege as much, so to get him here on Locked On Kings is just as much of a treat for me as it is for you, maybe even more so. But are you buying or are you selling? selling a lot of the stock that Jason and I just discussed? Let me know. You can tell me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac, SAC. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or feel free to leave your comments down below if you're watching on YouTube, which stock you're buying and which stock you're selling. And maybe you have your own stock statement that you want to present to me and share with me if you're buying or selling that stock, and I'll share with you whether or not I agree or disagree. Let's have some fun with this for the remainder of the offseason, which is, by the way, coming to an end very, very quickly. We are closing in on the start of preseason. We're less than a month away from that. Kings basketball right around the corner. Allow NFL football to kill that time for you. But once Kings season starts, I know you're going to be locked in here on Locked On Kings, no pun intended. I appreciate you listening to the Locked On Kings podcast today. Appreciate all your support. Until next time, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.